advisors is providing a controversial peek behind the curtain into how the Ukraine peace plan came together. And the reporting lands just ahead of a scheduled meeting to try to finalize the deal in Moscow next week. According to a transcript of an October call published by Bloomberg, President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, advised a senior Putin official on how to pitch the plan to Trump. Witkoff said Putin should lead with flattery and call before Trump meets with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House. The original 28-point U.S. drafted deal was criticized for being overly favorable to Russia. And at least one Republican senator now says he does not believe Witkoff can be trusted to lead the negotiations. Joining us now, Ben Rhodes, Deputy National Security Advisor in the Obama administration. It's always good to see you, Ben. How unusual is it for someone in the White House to coach a foreign country, an adversary no less, on how to handle the president? How do you think Barack Obama would have taken that if you had called the Russian and told him how to handle the president?
Well, I mean, your question is unthinkable in any other administration, and not just the Obama administration. It's unthinkable that we'd have a situation like this, where it feels like the Russians kind of brought their own maximalist surrender plan, essentially, for Ukraine to Witkoff, thinking that he would be, essentially a friendly voice inside the administration. And then we subsequently learned that as, Marco Rubio is over there trying to make this a little bit more balanced and still overwhelmingly favoring Russia, you've got, Witkoff coaching the Russians on how to flatter Trump to get him on their side before he talks to Zelensky. I mean, I could see a scenario in which you might coach an ally, about how to enter negotiations, not how to handle your own president, but how to deal with negotiations. But it's truly extraordinary that we're kind of so far through the looking glass here, Chris, that we have a close associate of the President of the United States coaching Russia on how to get the best terms possible in a quote unquote peace deal that is essentially validating their invasion of Ukraine.
Does that give us, does knowledge of this conversation give us any useful understanding as we try to look at what might happen next week in Moscow?
I think it does, because essentially what you have here is this Russian plan is everything they want. Ukraine has to give up more territory than even Russia occupies now. They never get to be in NATO. They don't really get any credible security guarantees. Russia gets sanctions relief. Russia's in the G8. NATO doesn't even get to expand to other countries. That's a very bizarre part of this plan. That's what came through Witkoff. Now, we also know Marco Rubio then sat down with the Ukrainians, and he's got a different plan. And so what you have is, inside of the administration, different policies here. You've got essentially a Russian policy kind of laundered through Witkoff. Then you've got Rubio trying to negotiate something that's acceptable to Ukrainians. But this is what Russia does. I think people have to understand, well, what's happening here. This is kind of dizzying. Russia is trying to divide the U.S. government internally. Russia is trying to divide the United States from Ukraine and our European allies. Russia is more than happy to continue this war and grind away at that front line, particularly because the United States isn't providing new military assistance to the Ukrainians. That's what they're doing here. If they can get a victory in the war at the negotiating table, they will. But if they can't, then this suits their purposes too, because it just exposes these divisions inside the U.S. government and inside the alliance.
So, Ben, Republican Congressman Dan Bacon posted on social media, quote, for those who oppose the Russian invasion and want to see Ukraine prevail as a sovereign and democratic country, it is clear that Witkoff fully favors the Russians. He cannot be trusted to lead these negotiations. Would a Russian-paid agent do less than he? He should be fired. Short of that, though, what's Volodymyr Zelensky supposed to think? And do.
Well, he's in a really tight spot. I mean, if I'm Zelensky, I basically share that same view. And look, let's also be clear here. The person that Witkoff was dealing with is the head of the sovereign wealth fund for Russia, right? The man who controls the money. There was another Russian official that he was talking on that call, but that's who he was hammering out this 28-point plan with to begin with. That does raise questions, about the Russians want business deals, and that's part of this plan, right? They want to do business with the United States. This should not be in a commercial channel here. The question is that Ukraine, a sovereign democratic country, was invaded by its bigger neighbor that is trying to eat away at its territory. And frankly, even if there's a ceasefire, wants to leave itself in such a stronger position that it can reinvade in the future. Zelensky needs the best terms possible for any ceasefire now, but even more importantly, he needs credible security guarantees going forward so that his country isn't just invaded all over again in 5 years. And so I think what he needs to do is, number one, he needs to find the people in the U.S. administration, that maybe Marco Rubio, that will be more even-handed about this. But I think even more importantly, the allies, the European and NATO allies, need to kind of have a common position with Ukraine about what acceptable terms are for the end of this war, so that at least we can get it out on the table here. Okay, here's the Ukrainian and European position. Here's the Russian position. And the United States should be in the position not of taking the Russian side and trying to ram it down Zelensky's throat. It should be in the position of trying to find, is there some way that we can increase leverage on Putin to get to an acceptable outcome here, where Ukraine's not going to get everything they want? But Zelensky can't just surrender here. He needs to walk away with at least, I think, credible security guarantees. And also, he should not be giving away any more territory than they've already lost. I mean, that should be a non-starter as well. And so I think he needs to shore up, whether it's in the United States, including in the U.S. Congress, by the way. Congress should have a voice on this, and in Europe, who his allies are and what their common position is. Because the more there's a unified position among Ukraine and its supporters, the stronger they'll be in terms of being able to push back against this kind of relentless Russian effort to take terms. By the way, Chris, we should say, the Russian terms haven't changed since January 20th when Trump was inaugurated. They brought the same type of plan to Alaska. They brought the same type of plan to Witkoff. We know what they want, but the point is that that's not acceptable to the Ukrainians and shouldn't be acceptable to Europe and the U.S., and that's the case Zelensky has to be taking to other capitals.
I also want to bring in Richard Stengel, Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs in the Obama administration. Rick, President Trump was asked whether he feared that Witkoff was too pro-Russia, and he said, quote, "No, this war could go on for years, and Russia's got a lot more soldiers." Another White House negotiator reportedly told the Ukrainians in no uncertain terms that defeat was imminent. It's time to make peace. Do you think that's a correct assessment? And if Russia is not willing to bend, how long can the Ukrainians hold on?
Well, it's a good question, Chris. And if we put the shoe on the other foot and the Russians had come to New York to negotiate a real estate deal with Witkoff, but they didn't speak English. They'd never been to New York before. They didn't know the history of New York real estate. Witkoff would think, man, I'm going to get the top of the deal. That is exactly how the Russians look at Witkoff. He's someone who has no experience on the international stage, doesn't understand the history of Russia and Ukraine. And, as Ben knows, Vladimir Putin can talk for hours about the history of Russia and Ukraine. Mr. Lavrov can do the same thing. So Witkoff is a little bit overmastered. And again, as to your previous discussion, the fact that he's advising the Russians on how to placate Trump and